For day one, I start off with a day focused on observations, and this is basically an adaptation of a video by BEETLES, the project that you can find in a YouTube video where they introduce this quote by Sherlock Holmes and then go through a sequence of I notice, I wonder, and it reminds me of. And you can do this outside in people's backyards or even with just objects around that they find around the house. So this can totally be done online. We begin day two with a leaf scavenger hunt, where we ask students to go out and photograph every type of leaf they can find. And if they can't go outside, they can look in their house for things that are natural and leaf-like. We can post it to Google Classroom or email or text, or basically find some way to get those pictures all together so that you can compare them side by side. And then we employ some of our observation skills from day one. In the chat, write something you notice about the different leaves. Then write a question in the chat, something you wonder about when you look at the leaves. Invariably, one of our students will come up with a question about why do some plants have bigger leaves than others? And we as the teacher can guide the class to really focusing in on this question. Now, everybody, of course, collected plants from their gardens or from outside, which are not very natural. When we make things grow outside in our gardens, we add water. And nature, of course, doesn't have sprinklers, so we want to try and think about how we could investigate this question of leaf size in a natural setting. And depending upon the level of our students, we'll spend more or less time having them plan that process out of what they would like to do in an ideal world. In this case, I worked with some talented fifth graders, and I basically spent my time scaffolding the investigation with them and giving them the online resources to do it. We'd start with this picture of a leaf which has no scale and ask them how big is it, and of course they come up with numbers, but they don't make sense until you start adding a scale. We can even change the scale and try and emphasize that you can get the same number even though the grid squares are different sizes, and that's important because we need to be able to represent really big leaves and really small leaves on our screens. We then scaffold the idea of how are we going to measure a single leaf? What does it mean to measure a leaf and how big it is? Whether we're going to measure the width across or the length of one leaf or the length across multiple leaves or the smallest leaves, and again, noticing the scale. I collected data from 5 different locations in the US that have different amounts of rainfall, and I'm going to send my students off to investigate those different spots. Each group of students is going to go into a breakout room where they measure just one location, so they only have data about one place. And then the students are going to post their data either into a chat window or ideally, if they've got the skills, to a collaborative spreadsheet so we can combine all of our data together. And then we look at a graph, and I always start by looking at the blank graph and applying adjectives to describe the different axes extents. So over here we have a dry setting on the horizontal axis. If we go over to the far right side where there's 150 inches of rain a year, that's wet. If we start off with a very, very small leaf, that's close to the 0 centimeters, and of course big leaves are up here at the 60 centimeter size. And so then we can ask the question, we can ask our students to draw. We can use the zoom annotation feature and have our students draw what they think this graph might look like. And a lot of our students actually start with this. They say that leaves are going to help the plant collect water. They have this misconception. And so a plant in a drier place is going to need a bigger leaf. And so that might look like that. Other people might say that the amount of water doesn't cause any change in the leaf size at all, and it might look like that. And lastly, if water somehow helps leaves grow bigger, we might see a graph like this. So we ask our students to make those predictions and draw those different graphs, and we then look at our data that look like this. We plotted the largest size leaf, the smallest leaf, and the average of all the leaves that we were able to measure. And we see this astonishing pattern. The more rain, the bigger the leaf. And in fact, when we put everything together, you can start seeing this. Here's our driest setting over to our wetter, and then wettest setting. And you can really see how leaf size correlates quite a bit with the amount of rainfall available in those areas. And even when we take a place that has the same amount of rain, 17 inches, this is along a hiking trail in one spot, and then when you get near a creek, you can start seeing the leaves start getting bigger near the leaf. So it's not just the amount of rain, it's actually the more water, the bigger the leaf. Then we come back on day 3, and we're really going to investigate this idea a little bit more. Why do some plants have bigger leaves? Well, we kind of want to know, what does the plant do with the water? And we know that the more water, the bigger the leaf, but why is that? How does that happen? And so we're going to go out and have our students collect a single leaf again and bring it inside and then draw their leaf. They're going to notice very carefully using a drawing the overall shape and the outline and also the details within the leaf. And we really want them to get here looking at the vein structure and the connectedness of the veins. And so at this point, we can have our students ask questions and they're going to come up with this question: why do plants have so many veins? What do they do? And I'm going to suggest to them that why do plants have bigger leaves than others, and why do plants have so many veins are going to be related because, of course, they both involve water. So here we're going to have our students draw a model of leaves, and we can do this again with the zoom annotations. I'm going to give them an example first. Let's say that you think that plants have big leaves so that water can spin around in circles inside them. So I want you to draw what that water pathway would be like on here with arrows. So where does the water go? And in this particular case, I said spin around in circles inside them, and so I draw something like that. But that's kind of not really, nobody thinks that's what happens with our leaves. So let's look at two other thoughts. So one student thinks that a plant in a dry place needs bigger leaves to capture enough water to survive. So what are we going to draw for our arrows to represent the flow of water in that situation versus the student that thinks a plant in a wet place has bigger leaves because they have more water available to use for growing big leaves? Where is the water going to travel in that scenario? And so we get our students to share those and maybe annotate in the zoom feature, in the zoom annotation feature. And we might see pictures that look kind of like these. But now let's get them to think about their model in a little bit more detail. Let's imagine you put a hole in the leaf. What might happen in your head when that happens? Is the leaf going to die or the whole plant going to die? And we can start making some predictions. The reason I propose this crazy scenario is because we actually have a fantastic video of this exact phenomenon. And what happened is researchers injected a glowing dye into water, and let's go ahead and watch the flow of water through this leaf and see what happens. You can see that the water flows through and none of it is leaking out. In fact, the plant has actually healed at this point such that the water travels all the way around. But what's really amazing here is look how the water is basically going everywhere in this leaf. Now, the video ends before it gets out to the very tips of the leaf here and everywhere in that, but just about every spot on this leaf is getting water delivered to it. We now return to our two models that we were looking at, and we ask the question, which model does this video support, what we're actually observing? Now, admittedly, this video is only showing one part of the flow of fluids within a plant. And if you know about the xylem and the phloem, there's all sorts of more complexity to it. But what we really want our students to be doing is to be able to compare a model and the flow of matter that they predicted to the flow of matter that they see in an actual observation. And we can add the complexities in a little bit later. Now we can return to our question, what does the plant do with the water? We of course know this pattern that the more rain, the bigger the leaf. But then we have this structure and function relationship that veins carry water to every part of the leaf. These two things together allow us to jump off into a day 4, where we're looking at the flow of matter during photosynthesis, and we can develop models for that, and there are a bunch of resources and simulators for teaching about photosynthesis online. But the key here is that we've motivated all of that by really exploring and observing things in our own backyard. And we can revisit some of those phenomena like the veins of the leaf size, and really put 2 and 2 together